Make sure you guys hit the subscribe button if you guys are enjoying the content that we're throwing up. And make sure you guys hit the like button if you enjoy the video. And yeah, let's begin. What's going on, guys? This is Rob and Rob Core Rings. I think I'm gonna start selling these things. Stay tuned for information about that. So what I wanna do in this video is I wanna compare Batman the Animated Series and XMen the Animated Series, right? And the reason why is because these were two of the greatest comic book shows ever made, right? And I grew up on these shows. Like I grew up on Batman and XMen the Animated Series. These were my go-to, right? Like it was the early 1990s and comic book cartoon shows were amazing. Let's start with Batman. Let's start with Batman the Animated Series. Okay, first things first, the intro, freaking amazing. The intro of Batman, let me tell you something, I used to get so hyped watching that intro. Dude, that intro was fire. And it was, dude, I don't know what it was. Maybe it was like the whole orchestra, right? Because they hired like the whole crew to like come in and make the intro for that show. But like the whole intro, there was just something about it, man. Like it would get you gassed up, right? So you'd be like, let's get into this, man. Let's get into this thing. The other thing about it was actually was the soundtrack of the show, because it wasn't just the intro, right? It wasn't just the intro going into this whole thing. It was the soundtrack of the show. Batman, I mean, Kevin Conroy is kind of the voice of Batman now, like, and he will be forever, right? Like people are gonna look at him, they're gonna say, that's the voice of Batman. Everybody else is just second best, right? So like, they're all getting door prizes, basically. It's cool, but they're no Kevin Conroy, right? I mean, I think we can all kind of agree on that. And so because of that, you know, when you look at the way the character was portrayed, Batman was dark and brooding and dramatic. If you go and you look at Christopher Nolan's Batman trilogy, yes, you have Bruce Wayne, and yes, you have Batman, but you look at Bruce Wayne and he feels like Batman. He feels like Batman putting on a mask and becoming like a regular guy, right? Like becoming Bruce Wayne. And there's nothing wrong with that. But the great thing about Batman the Animated Series is they felt like two totally different people, right? They felt like two completely different people. You had Batman who was just like dark and brooding, and you were probably afraid he was gonna kill you. And then you had Bruce Wayne who was just like, yeah, man, I get laid like all the time because I'm rich and I'm hot. It was crazy to kind of see it unfold. Alfred was probably one of the coolest characters there, right? Because Alfred was cool, he was laid back and he was toned down, and it was interesting, you know, to see him kind of do his thing, you know, and to kind of be like Master Bruce, you know, and so on and so forth. He was really kind of what you would expect Alfred to be. But here's where I think Batman the Animated Series really stood out. The villains. The villains, I think, are what really made Batman the Animated Series so cool. And that's one of the things I've always talked about, right? It's one of the reasons why I've always said that I think the future of comic book movies are gonna move away from superheroes and start focusing more on villains, because oftentimes the villains are more interesting than the heroes, depending on how the story's done. And you look at somebody like the Riddler, right? The Riddler was really, really cool. What was the name of the episode? If You're So Smart, Why Aren't You Rich? I think is where you're introduced to Edward Nygma. But like the Riddle of the Minotaur, dude, it's like one of the most exciting episodes ever, right? Like the Hand of Fate, like that thing comes swooping in, and it was like and then it carries them away, and it's just, dude, it was one of the most exciting things ever, right? It was such a cool episode. But I love the riddles, because the cool thing about the episodes with the Riddler, the cool thing about them is while the episodes were entertaining, it was as much fun for me to try to figure out the answer as it was watching Batman and Robin and them try to figure out the answer, right? So I felt more immersed, I felt more involved in those episodes. Two-Face was really, really interesting. The Penguin was cool. Like the Penguin was really, really fun. I loved Hugo Strange, right? What was the episode? I can't remember the name of it, but I think it was the Secret of Bruce Wayne. But it was the episode where Hugo Strange had been blackmailing people by basically parading himself as a person that can help people get through like their worst moments, the things that really cause them the most grief. And he was secretly recording them, right? And then using that information and saying like, you have to give me some money or do me political favors or something like that, or I'm going to release this to the world. And I want to say it was like a judge or some chick like that who would set off the Gotham City fire when she was a little kid. I can't remember what her name was, which is kind of ironic because I watched the episode like 3 weeks ago. but like it was cool stuff like that. Honestly, elephant in the room, right? The standout star of Batman the Animated Series. The standout star was the Joker. Here's the thing, man. Here is the thing. Like all my favorite episodes of Batman the Animated Series have the Joker. And it's just because he was as goofy and silly as he was dangerous. And the laugh, dude, the laugh. the Joker's laugh. I loved the Joker's laugh because I would crack up. I couldn't help but laugh whenever I heard the Joker's laugh. Mark Hamill did that perfect, but it was the small little things that made the Joker so memorable, right? Like there's one episode where the Joker floods the entirety of Gotham City with either like laughing gas or Joker toxin. I don't think it was Joker toxin because people weren't like, they didn't become, didn't like die as versions of the Joker. But he flooded the entire city of Gotham and then started like ransacking the place. And there's this great moment because it's one that has Captain Clown, and there's, Captain Clown. Dude, I loved Captain Clown. You killed Captain Clown. Dude, I loved Captain Clown. He was amazing. The idea here was that they were on a boat and they basically rowed up to the docks, and you got that amazing music, like dun, 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 dun. And you get this amazing music, and the Joker and all his henchmen come out with grocery carts, and he's like, now everyone remember where we parked. It was stuff like that, man. Like it was these hilarious little things. There's one moment, there was one hilarious moment. I think it was the Christmas special, and it was the one where Joker had taken over one of the television stations, and he had taken like Commissioner Gordon and the main reporter chick, and maybe one or two other people hostage, and Batman had to go and rescue them. And so Batman eventually catches up with the Joker, and like the Joker gives him a box, gives him like a present, right? I know a lot of you guys know what I'm talking about. Joker gives him a present, and Batman opens it up, and it's just like a hand comes out and puts a pie in his face. It was the small little things. It was the small little things. It was never really the schemes of the Joker that made him entertaining, because they were pretty straightforward, right? Like the Joker has a scheme, he wants to rob stuff, and that's basically it. But the adaptation, because basically Joker from Batman the Animated Series was Steve Englehart's run on the Joker. Like it was Steve Englehart's run on Batman in the animated series. And so like Joker trying to copyright Fish, like different things like that. The Joker, what was it? Joker's Favor, the one where like that guy cuts him off, and then like the Joker chases him down. Like it was small little things like that. It was I think that was actually the one where Harley Quinn was introduced, but it was small little things like that. Joker, I think, really elevated Batman the Animated Series to a whole new level, right? Because for all of us who were watching, it was always one of these things where it was like, we want to see Batman and the Joker face off against each other. And seeing Joker transcend the animated series, right? Seeing him go into Batman Mask of the Phantasm was even cooler, right? It was, what was, oh my God, dude, what was that scene? There's this hilarious moment in Batman Mask of the Phantasm. Was it Sal Valestra, who was a mobster, had gone to the Joker for help, and the Joker had basically killed him, right? And so you didn't know he was dead. Like all you knew was the Phantasm goes walking into Sal Valestra's place, right? He's like, Sal Valestra, your angel of death awaits. It was really cool. The voice of the Phantasm was amazing. And so like as soon as that happens, like Sal Valestra is like in a chair, the chair spins around and the newspaper falls down or something like that. And like there's this camera that looks up and the Joker's like, whoops, guess the joke's on me. It was hilarious. And like Joker blows the place up and he's like, hello, operator, I believe my party's been disconnected. Things like that, little moments like that made the show fantastic, right? Just absolutely elevated the show from like this comic book show to something that would just that would last forever, right? They would be like one of the most definitive comic book adaptations ever. And so from there, I want to shift over to the X-Men. The intro to that show, much like Batman the Animated Series, was fire. Like seeing all the characters and things like that, and the soundtrack, like it was cool, it was like like it's like you hear that song and you immediately know where it's from. You're like, X-Men the Animated Series. The song was ripped off from some guy in Europe, but it's still cool. It was an amazing intro. From there, I think that X-Men the Animated Series, the soundtrack didn't match Batman the Animated Series, right? It wasn't on that same level because they didn't really bring in like a whole orchestra for the soundtrack, right? I mean, the soundtrack of I think even in some instances, what was happening, like the background music, the soundtrack in X-Men the Animated Series didn't always match the tone of what was going on at the time. And so I think with Batman the Animated Series, it almost always matched the tone. Like it set the stage for what was going on. A dark and broody moment, Batman's dark and broody, the song sounds dark and broody. With X-Men the Animated Series, it was a lot more it was a lot more rock oriented, right? Like, electric guitars, different things like that, which was fine for what it was, because I think it was designed to be a more kind of in your face sort of situation. Having said that, the stories in X-Men the Animated Series I think beat out Batman the Animated Series. I really think they do. And the reason why is because I could sit down and I can basically watch through entire seasons of X-Men the Animated Series without really getting bored. There were a few episodes here and there where I got kind of bored, like the story of the Morlocks, different things like that. I was like, okay, that's cool, I guess, watching Storm fight Callisto, whatever. But sitting down and watching, like, pound for pound, watching the episodes and just going like from one season to the next, it only got better as time goes on. And there were some episodes that really stood out, right? Like One Man's Worth, which was a 2-part episode, and it basically showed what would happen if Xavier died before he could create the X-Men. And it ends up being that like a war breaks out between humans and mutants, and Magneto's leading what not really even the X-Men, just the mutant resistance. But it's cool to watch that episode and see like Mr. Sinister fighting alongside like the mutant population against humanity. It was cool little things like that. Time Fugitives was a fantastic episode, right? The episode where Cable has to basically go into the past and help Apocalypse defeat the X-Men in order to ensure the timeline, like the survival of his future. Ultimately, he ends up fighting a different way, and they sort of incorporated the legacy virus into it. But looking at those things, the Sentinels were really, really awesome to see. Watching Magneto sort of lose his mind on various heroes was amazing to see. And as far as the episodic events go, they were cool, right? Like there was a really good episode where not Mimic, Morph, that was a character, Morph, who was actually created for the show and didn't really appear in the comics until much later on. But to see the episode, where like Morph died in like the first 2 or 3 episodes, I think it was, he died, I think in the second part of Night of the Sentinels, although I think it was when they launched their attack against the Sentinel base. But for Morph to have been killed, right? And then to have been taken by Mr. Sinister, and then to have his mind warped, and then basically be brought back, and then basically become like a villain. There was a really good episode where, I don't think it was called Redemption, it was a one named episode, but it was basically where Morph had to like kind of regain his bearings, right? And so there was this amazing sequence of events where Morph, I think, is facing off against the Sentinels in Master Mold, and he starts like shifting into all these different mutants and using their powers. Like he's basically like a one-man army. When I look at the various characters in the show, right? Like Wolverine, obviously they couldn't have a show where Wolverine killed people, so Wolverine would like slash and tear apart like robots and like the robot henchmen of the Hellfire Club and like the Sentinels and things like that. And that was kind of cool to see. Looking at the characters, the great thing about this is for the most part, each one of the characters stood on their own. Nightcrawler stood on his own, right? You looked at Nightcrawler in isolation, and he was for the most part a pacifist that would only really fight when he had to. Professor X was the leader of the team, but you could also tell he was kind of a dick, right? He was a little bit of a dick. Juggernaut was really kind of this big lumbering buffoon, but was still pretty cool in terms of how he was shown, in terms of the power he had, how dangerous of a threat he was. Seeing the fight between him and Gladiator was legit as fast as it was. That fight was like that. That fight was like 5 seconds long, right? Like Gladiator comes down from Shi'ar space, coming after Devon Shikari, coming after like what was Eric the Red is what he was masquerading as, and like Juggernaut's hanging out with Black Tom Cassidy, who's this guy that can control plants. Which, by the way, if you're reading X-Force, Black Tom Cassidy is legit now. He sucked until like just now. Like now he's cool, but he's hanging out with Black Tom Cassidy at Cassidy Keep, and like Gladiator comes out and Juggernaut's like starting crap, and he's like, dude, I'm not worried about this guy, and he goes to punch Gladiator and nothing happens, and Gladiator like picks him up and just throws him throws him like 3 miles. Dude, it was amazing to see that kind of stuff go on, right? But you look at each one of the characters and they all for the most part stand on their own. I think that when it comes to the standout stars of the show, when it comes to the show where you look at those characters, you say which ones are the best, I think for a lot of people, it was Gambit. Like Gambit was an amazing character in the show. But here's the thing, much like Batman the Animated Series, while the show did have like, and really on a solid front had some very, very cool heroes, the villains were the ones who made the show fantastic. The villains were the ones who really made the show stand out, right? Magneto was an amazing character. It was so cool to see him. There's this really, really good moment. He kidnaps Senator Robert Kelly, and then Sentinels are sent after Robert Kelly to rescue him. And like they go and they try to attack Magneto, and he's on like this giant tanker, right? And he tries to use his powers against him, and they're like, your powers aren't gonna work on us. Like, we are like a durable plastic. And Magneto's like, fools, like I'm on a tanker. This whole thing is my weapon. And he's like pulling out rivets and stuff and just like launching these things at the Sentinels. It was cool. Like it was a really cool moment there. But Magneto was dynamic. Magneto was a guy where you looked at him and realized he's not just like a regular villain, right? He's not just like a regular guy where he's like, I'm gonna rob a bank. He was a guy who was basically like, Xavier's philosophy doesn't work. You get really cool stories like Sanctuary, where he basically creates Asteroid M. You get the acolytes of Magneto, Fabian Cortez, who in the comics was actually a pretty interesting character. In the show, they really did him justice. But you get these great depictions of Magneto as a villain. But to me, the standout villain of the show, the standout villain of X-Men the Animated Series, was Apocalypse. Dude, I loved Apocalypse. He had the best one. Dude, Apocalypse had the best one-liners ever in the history of any comic book show. Dude, it was amazing. I am the rocks on the eternal shore. Smash against me and be broken. Dude, it was, dude, it's like the most ballin' thing ever, right? Like when that guy showed up, you're like, oh man, dude, son, he was getting ready to pop off. It was amazing, right? Because he could do pretty much anything. And like, and here's the coolest thing about it. The way that Apocalypse was depicted in the show, in terms of the power he possessed, the way he talked, the guy who voiced him over, how like intimidating he was, Apocalypse had this sort of like imposing presence in the show, right? Like Apocalypse shows up and like you kind of had this lingering feeling that like everybody was gonna die, right? Like, you know, like at any moment they could all be killed by Apocalypse, because all the X-Men can ever really do is hold him off. And that was one of the coolest things that was shown between the comics that really was kind of elevated in the comics under Luis and Walter Simonson and X-Factor, and in like the actual X-Men the Animated Series, was they could never really defeat Apocalypse. All they could do was just kind of keep him at bay. They could defeat his Horsemen, they could pass the testing, and then ultimately Apocalypse would go back to whatever it was he was doing before. But they could never really defeat him. He was just too powerful of a foe. And it was cool to see that integrated into the comics, so he wasn't just like a villain of the day kind of guy, where it's like, well, they fight Apocalypse and Apocalypse is dead now. Moving on. Like, it wasn't really anything that basic or that simple. Beyond Good and Evil was a 4-part series where Apocalypse, it was basically the 12 from Marvel Comics minus the Skrulls, and Apocalypse had essentially captured like 12 of the most powerful psychics in existence across the universe, and then brought them all to a place outside of time, to the nexus of time. And basically it took like the X-Men and whoever else they could gather to defeat Apocalypse. And it was cool to see that whole thing happen, right? Like, he was just this imposing figure, this imposing character. And so having said all of that, like looking at these two shows reasonably, right? Like looking at these two shows for what they are, sitting down and comparing, you know, between the episodic progression of the shows, the characters in the show, the soundtracks of the show, and leaving nostalgia out of it, right? Like leaving my own personal feelings of the show out of it, and looking at them objectively. In reality, I'll have to go with Batman the Animated Series. And it hurts me to say it. It hurts me to say that Batman the Animated Series I think is better. But here's the reason why. X-Men the Animated Series was a great show. It was a fantastic show, and the heroes were all interesting, and it was a show that got me into comic books, right? And because of X-Men the Animated Series, I've been reading X-Men ever since, right? So since about 1993, 1994, I've been reading the X-Men consistently, right? Like year after year after year, I've always been reading the X-Men. But the issue with X-Men the Animated Series, it was following the classic 3-part narrative, right? The setup, the conflict, and the resolution, which is classic storytelling, but you didn't really get to see the gritty stuff in between, the nuanced things in between. And that's what really set Batman the Animated Series apart. With Batman the Animated Series, it was this progression of we go from A to B to C. But what you got to see was A, and then A and a half, and then B. And then B, you know, and then like B and a half, and then C. You got to see what went on in between from start to finish. It was a full-on cohesive story. And because of that, because of the fact that you looked at Batman the Animated Series and you saw everything from like top to bottom, right? So not only what it was that Batman was doing, but how it impacted not just him, but the criminal element, as well as like the cities of Gotham, because of how the depiction of Gotham was done, insofar as like the kind of gothic and overall tone, because the music set the tone for the show, because of all these different things that all sort of came together to create this kind of perfect depiction of Batman. It really, I wouldn't say that like it trounces and absolutely crushes X-Men the Animated Series, but I do think it's better, because I think that from top to bottom the show's stronger, it's more cohesive, and it's more solid. And it pains me to say that because I loved X-Men the Animated Series so much. But having said that, I want to know what you guys think. I want to know what your opinions are. Which one do you like more, Batman the Animated Series or X-Men the Animated Series? And let me know if you guys want to see more of these, because this is actually really, really fun, right? Like, we can compare other shows. We can say Batman the Animated Series versus the Justice League Unlimited, right? Because that was a really cool show back in the day. We could do like Batman the Animated Series versus Teen Titans, or Teen Titans versus Spider-Man the Animated Series, and just kind of go from there. But let me know what you guys think. Let me know how you guys feel about this kind of comparison between these shows. With that being said, we're going to bring this video to an end. If you are new here to Comics Explained, make sure you guys hit the sub button to become part of the Rob Show. If you guys enjoy, or not the Rob Show, if you guys enjoy this video, okay, let's try that again. If you are new here to Comics Explained, make sure you guys hit the sub button to become part of the Rob Corps. If you guys enjoyed this video, make sure you drop a like, and I will catch you all later. Peace.